We are back with host of the Working People podcast, Max Alvarez, Senior Director of Policy at the Conservative Partnership Institute, Rachel Bovard, Principal at the Raven Group, Estuardo Rodriguez, and journalist Zed Jelani. We wanted to look forward from the debate, which of course was in South Carolina. South Carolina unfolds this weekend, Super Tuesday, fast on its heels next week. The latest South Carolina poll that we have, this is coming out of NBC News Marist. You've got all voters there, and you've got African-American voters as well. Very, very close race that we're talking about at this point between Biden and Sanders, Estuardo. You know, I think we all kind of felt like the debate more or less preserved the status quo. Who do you think that benefits most in South Carolina?
I think in South Carolina, it benefits Biden the most to stay strong, keep his numbers. Last night, as I was just saying, I think last night there were a few candidates that stood out simply because it was time for them to go. If they do go, when you look at those poll numbers, who do those voters go for? Do they go for Elizabeth Warren? Do they build up a base for her? Maybe. But there are several candidates that are probably not going to make it all the way to convention.
There's no data to indicate that.
And I think those voters are going to go somewhere. Do the Steyer voters really go to Bernie? I don't think they do. I don't think the math is there. So I think it's a long game for Elizabeth
Warren.
It's
actually about half and half. It's like 40 Biden, 30% Bernie, according to somebody we spoke with yesterday. Zed, I want to get you in on this, which is that, okay, Biden wins South Carolina, gets a decent media bump out of that. 2 days until Super Tuesday. Is that enough to keep him? Because this is kind of the nightmare scenario for Bernie, which is that then you have a scenario where there's Bloomberg, Biden, and Bernie, three-way, 15% all across the South and in big states. That almost guarantees, not guarantees, but it gets you pretty close to a broker convention. It seems eminently possible if Biden wins South Carolina. By all indications, that's probably what's going to happen.
Look, I think if Biden were to lose South Carolina, the primary is over. Bernie's the guy. I think most people would expect Biden to win South Carolina, which will keep it going for a while. I do think there was a national poll out today that showed that something like 48% of Democratic voters are considering Bernie, and the next closest is like 39.
Wow.
With someone like Biden. So I think Bernie would still be certainly in the lead, but it's exactly what you mentioned.
No denying he's going to be in the lead, Rachel, but you can still, look, I mean, I am very much of the mind that if they have the chance at the convention, they're going to try.
Oh, of course.
And take, I mean, look, we were there with Trump. If they had the chance, they would have taken it.
The parallels are unbelievably striking right now between what happened with Trump and what's going on with Bernie. And so they're going to use a Biden victory in South Carolina, if there is one, to say, oh, look, this is still possible. We're going forward. Look, African-American voters, they love Joe Biden, even though it's a one-off, right? Bernie has shown consistently that he can play well in this field, like on any number of states. But Biden in South Carolina, he's poured a ton of resources in his state. He called it his firewall.
Right.
Like,
Max, they're going to do that thing where they go, well, if you add Biden and Bloomberg together, it's actually more than anybody else. It's like, well, first of all, nobody votes that way.
Well, that's the thing. That's the cognitive dissonance that always blows me away, is when they want, like, there was like a great tweet where it was like, okay, well, it's Bernie versus like three centrists in a trench coat. Right? I mean, because like all stacked up on top of each other. But the thing is that logic never goes the other way, right? It's always like, oh, but Biden is splitting the centrist ticket between two other people. Meanwhile, no one ever says like, well, Bernie, like they try to say like, well, Bernie's lost a lot of ground since 2016 when he was running against like one person. Right? I mean, like, but that logic never goes the other way.
The Nevada results put some of that mythology to bed. I mean, Max, what do you think that Bernie needs to do in South Carolina? I mean, I think he could win. I think he is in a position where he could potentially win. The polls continue to show him moving up, but I would give the edge to Biden at this point. Is the second place finish there enough? Does it need to be a strong second? How does he need to do with African-American voters? How are you looking at all of that?
I mean, personally, I think I obviously, agree with Zed that if he wins, then the primary's over. I think if he has a strong second place showing, more or less kind of stays where he is. But, again, I'm saying this now, even though I know what the media narrative is going to be. Like, this is not a bump for Biden. Like, at best, it is him keeping his fingers on the railroad tracks and not falling.
It's him meeting the bar he set for himself.
Leading in South Carolina by 50 points. And Estuardo, I don't think that we've really grappled with the fact that Bernie Sanders has just pulled off something that no candidate has ever pulled off, which is to get the most votes in the first three states. No one has ever done that. And so it is funny. I mean, the media narrative is funny that they would give Biden so much credit for this distant second in Nevada.
Right.
And if he ekes out a win in what outside of Delaware is certainly his strongest state in the entire country, then it's suddenly going to be, oh, he's a juggernaut and he's the great alternative to Bernie. Does that really add up?
To the media, it does. You made a great argument right there.
Right.
Yeah, I think part of that also comes with the set expectation early on that Biden was the candidate, and so there's a constant effort to validate that math was always going to be there. So yeah, I think Bernie is doing an amazing job. Biden is holding on. We've always had the bar lower for Biden because we expected him to be that candidate.
Right.
What he does, in South Carolina is going to be great for the campaign to hold on, and then he's going to bank on Super Tuesday because there are some states that he did very well in last time that he's hoping will hold on for him. If the math adds up, I honestly don't think it's going to for this go around because Bernie's growth has been just snowballing.
Let me throw a little bit of a wrench in this. Just got a Missouri poll, and this one shows actually Biden 22, Bloomberg 17, Buttigieg 11, Sanders 11. So in the South, and particularly places with larger African American populations, not necessarily South Carolina, where they have that massive infrastructure, Rachel, what do you think they need to do? And what do you think their campaign has to do? Because right now, I mean, it's working a little bit, but it's not the overwhelming 48 blowout that Zed is talking about.
Yeah, the Sanders campaign?
Yes, the Sanders.
Yeah, this is going to be, I think, the weak spot for him. And I think he really needs to work on this, sort of moderate rural voter who maybe has a fracking job and likes it.
Right.
And I think that's going to be a really tough spot for him because I know he has a transition plan. I know all you guys are going to troll me on Twitter about it.
Yes, I've heard about the damn transition plan too.
But there's a question of whether or not those are effective. We've seen them in Europe and they haven't worked. Green jobs are not necessarily sustainable jobs. So I think that's where he's going to suffer because we've seen so far sort of him play in these coastal areas, these very heavily political states where people are paying attention. He hasn't really addressed, I think, the Midwestern voter who hears the word socialism and is scared.
But I think the best way to address that, Zed, is just to win. I mean, that's what we see, right? That's why he keeps going up in the polls. Voters, overwhelmingly, his highest favorability. They trust him most on the issues. Their top issues are healthcare and climate change. He's the number one issue for Democratic primary voters. General election voters may be a different deal.
Yep.
And in Nevada, what we saw for the first time is that not only did he win the voters who said the most important thing is that the candidate shares my values, but he also won the voters who said the most important thing is that this candidate is electable. And the best way to make that case isn't to be on a debate stage citing this poll number or that poll number. It's to win.
I think you're exactly right. And I think that's the difference between where Sanders was in early January and that's where he is now. I think Democratic voters are eager to have a nominee. They want somebody who's winning, who's getting across the finish line. And something you have to remember about the South is, let's take it outside the racial, cultural context. Black voters in the South are generally more conservative than black voters elsewhere. I think in California, Sanders will do very well with African American voters. I think in the South, it's just a more conservative clientele and generally a more conservative electorate. And I think that is really what Biden's counting on. But it'll be very different than 2016 because it won't all be consolidated around one candidate.
Right.
For Clinton, that solid South really was a game changer. It made it very difficult for Sanders to ever come back. If Biden does well in the South, but he's splitting this with Bloomberg, he's splitting it with Bernie, it's not really that much of a game changer. It'll give him a little bit of a second wind, but it's not actually going to change the fundamentals of the race the way that, let's say, in 2016, with Clinton having that massive solid block with only two candidates.
And we know the case that the Sanders campaign has seen from the get-go. If you have the black vote basically divided and you have a solid block of Latinos behind Bernie Sanders, then that becomes the winning coalition. So we'll watch and see if that translates post-Nevada.
Thank you guys.
Thank you guys.
Thanks.
All right, we're going to have some parting thoughts for you just after this.